Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Frank DePaula. My daytime job is serving as the CISO for a global manufacturing company called Enpro. Uh, in my free time, I volunteer my hours contributing to Cloud Security Alliance's Zero Trust Working Group. And I'm here today to help discuss the topic of zero trust guidance for small and medium-sized businesses. Along with me today is Andrea Knobloch, who's the principal for security for SoftChoice. And we're also joined by someone who needs no introduction, but I'll introduce him anyway, Dr. Chase Cunningham, who is the VP of Security Market Research at G2. So thank you both for joining me today on this discussion.
Yeah, thanks
So
for having me.
as we get started, I thought it would be maybe fitting to define the definition of what constitutes a small and medium-sized business. I'll share in the early development of the document, there was quite a bit of debate on the topic. So from our all intents and purposes, the definition of a small and medium-sized business is really an organization, not necessarily of a specific revenue size or number of employees or even scope of operation, but organizations who are impacted by specific business constraints, things like, particularly, smaller cybersecurity budgets, maybe not necessarily having enough staff or the right skill sets to perform the functions that maybe larger enterprises do. Things like this. Obviously, they are smaller businesses when compared to enterprises, but we tried not to necessarily define our own definitions for SMBs and instead point to external sources for the definition. So with that said, wanted to discuss the agenda and what we're going to talk about this afternoon. First is really the benefits of zero trust for small and medium-sized businesses. We'll dig into, some of the reasons why SMBs should invest and explore opportunities to employ zero trust in their environments. We'll also talk about some of the more actionable, cost-effective strategies that they can employ. We'll dig into the 5-step implementation methodology and how to make this more manageable for small and medium-sized businesses. And then we'll also share some resources at the end and additional reading and information that small and medium-sized businesses can pursue to further down the path. So as we step into the first element of this discussion today, maybe I'll throw out the question to this group here. Why should SMBs care about cybersecurity? And one thing I'll share is SMBs contribute a significant amount of to the global economy, but they may face unique cyber risks. So I want to throw this out to the group. What are your thoughts about the unique risks that SMBs face compared to enterprises?
Yeah, happy to kick it off. For me, it's you kind of called it out there. They're still such a large part of the economy, which makes them a target for malicious actors. When you think about the cost of a cyber attack, the ease of a cyber attack for a lot of these groups, why not go after this market where we know they don't necessarily have, huge security departments. Maybe they're lean. Maybe just the financial economics around their organization, they don't necessarily have the most advanced security tools in their environment or those types of strategies in place. So it almost becomes a very attractive market for these bad folks, just because they know they're probably going to have a higher success rate of getting some kind of payout.
Yeah, I'm interested when I think about SMBs because if you look at the trends, I mean, I'm a data geek, so for me, the trends have kind of shown that the adversarial side of this topic, other than nation states, has moved away from going after mega enterprises because they used to be the big kind of easy target and lots of bang for your buck and whatever. But now because those organizations have spent enough money and kind of been at this for a while, they've become harder. I wouldn't say hard targets, but harder. And the adversarial side of this realizes, well, the low-hanging fruit is small and mid-sized businesses because they're connected in. their contractors, their third parties, their vendors. So that's where they're going and that's where they're gravitating. And for an enterprise, if they get compromised or hacked, statistically speaking, it's actually good for business. Whereas for an SMB, like you have on this stat here, it's very possible they could go flat out of business within a year of being compromised. So the stakes are exponentially harder, higher rather. And for the side of where things are gravitating and going, the days of SMBs being able to sit around and go like, well, I'm not a target for anybody. Why would they come after me? Those days are long gone. You're a target because you exist and because you have connections to other networks.
Thanks. Well, thank you, Bo. That's great feedback. Maybe a follow-on question, do you think that we're doing enough to share the story of the risk to the business leaders that we might need to convince to fund, further investments in these types of technologies and maybe approaches to cybersecurity?
I mean, I think at the broad level, the kind of cyber geek community have done ourselves a bit of a disservice because we've talked too long about the cyber specific side of this thing and the hacks and the bad things and the, cool stuff we can do with computers, where in reality, like you're saying, Frank, it's a business decision. So I think until we get better at speaking business, we're not going to resonate with that side of the table. But this report is a great one to start to get people to really look at this from a perspective of non-cyber geek jargon and start understanding what to do and why it's of value.
Yeah, I would just add one of the conversations I'm starting to see emerge is, what kind of risk tolerance do we have? And using that to kind of bridge the gap with the business, and take kind of the technology talk out of it, but really say, what's our risk? What is the impact if X, Y, and Z happens? If you're okay with the risk and you're able to sign off on it, then at least we've got a kind of a base understanding. But absolutely, those board conversations are going to be so critical, because security has to get back into the business.
Yeah, I think you both make great points, and Chase, something that you said makes me think about, one of the I guess thought processes that we had when we were developing the document, and that is, we have to do a better job of convincing the business leaders that they are a target, right? And to your point, I think that, some of the research that we've seen indicates that the target is only growing for SMBs. And so it's super imperative that they start investing appropriately and not just, go like the ostrich, putting their head in the sand, and really start to focus on what needs to happen to improve their ability to stand a fighting chance against the attackers. So thank you both for that. Well, so, as we kind of further expand the conversation, one of the areas that we really focus on in the deliverable is to talk about some of the specific challenges that SMBs face. And we've kind of alluded to some of those, in the previous slide, but, limited resources, expertise, and maybe one area that I think we probably all have our own beliefs around is cybersecurity awareness. So as we think about SMBs and the need for awareness, whatever that looks like, how do you think we can be more effective in our strategies and approaches to raise awareness to some of these threats?
I'd defer to Andrea on that because she's probably seen more about the awareness side of things than I have.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's kind of the two awarenesses. It's the stakeholders and the business owners. I think for the longest time we saw, even on the smaller side, security is a cost of business, and reiterating that in order to do business, you have to have insurance, you have to have compliance, you have to have all these baseline things. Security has to be seen as part of that. Whether they sold it well or not to the business, compliance kind of helps us in that area, because now we're seeing, for example, around cyber insurance, which a lot of the commercial side and SMBs are really leaning in on, is you have to have at least these basic hygiene around security. So the awareness is starting to increase, but even just, again, thinking about the workforce, how long have we been doing cyber security training, from the smallest business to the largest business? And it's creating that mindset. And I feel like our personal lives have maybe done more to teach us about the impact of cybersecurity and the need for basic controls and thinking about, is this, a phishing scam? Is this a risk? I think maybe just personal life has given us a bit more education than maybe we've done for the last couple of years.
Yeah, that's a great point. When I think about, the effectiveness of security awareness, I think, there's sort of a point of diminishing returns, right? How much time and energy do we want to invest in this mindset that, everybody represents a part of the attack surface? But at some point, if we're investing too much in security awareness, training and solutions, well, those are dollars that we're not investing in preventative controls. And so when I think about that, I think it's as much art as it is science, and there's no clear, fast guidance on, how somebody should approach that. Personally, I'm a big fan of, finding opportunities for security awareness training technologies that become largely self-service, set it and forget it. I think there's a lot of regurgitation of sharing the same threats that we can benefit from, and it doesn't necessarily have to take significant amount of time from away from our engineers who are doing maybe different types of work, but it can become more of an automated type approach. So I've seen this work, and I think it's a fair point to understand that security and awareness training really can only take an organization so far, because as they said, it only takes one person to click a link or take some sort of action that brings down the whole deck of cards. So along with some of the other challenges that SMBs typically face that we address in our document, we talk quite a bit about the reliance on managed service providers, MSPs, or throughout the document, we also refer to them as managed security service providers, or MSSPs. And we really try to differentiate the two, where MSPs can be providers of any type of technical service, whereas MSSPs provide some sort of focused security capability to an SMB organization. And so with the reliance on MSPs or MSSPs for that matter, do you have any thoughts on where they can come in and maybe serve as a force multiplier for an SMB organization?
I mean, for me, I think that this is where things really make a lot of sense. Just on the strategy side of the equation, I do a lot of pro bono work with organizations that are trying to figure out how to do cybersecurity, and 9 times out of 10, my advice to them is to start working with an MSP or MSSP, because here's the thing: is you can't dip your toe in cyber and actually get it right. You need to be dedicated to it, and you need to be able to allocate resources that will deal with things when they do go wrong. And MSSPs or MSPs are a good way to do that if they're able to provide that capability and that service. This is the force multiplication, if you ask me. And I like to tell the folks that I work with, like, do you do your own taxes? And pretty much all of them say no, because they always want to make sure they're getting it right. Okay, well, you go to a CPA. Well, why? Well, because that's what they do all day, every day. They don't get it wrong, and I'm not going to prison. Okay, well, let's do the same thing for cyber, because it makes a lot of sense, and that's what they do, and that's where you can get the most bang for your buck. So I think this is really valuable for small businesses to understand. It's not farming things out, and it's not abandoning, a resource, or not being dedicated to your customers or clients. It's the fact that you have other things to do, and there's a reason the word service is in there. They will service your business and keep it safe and secure.
Yeah, great points. All right. So as we further on down the path of what we've addressed in the small and medium-sized business white paper, we really tried to pay a lot of attention and focus to outlining the different benefits of zero trust for small and medium-sized businesses. We address the enhancement of security, right? How zero trust principles can help, first of all, potentially prevent breaches altogether. But if an organization, an SMB, is breached, it can help condense the time frame that organization remains breached, or also reduce the amount of financial impact of that particular breach. That leads into resilience, just making that organization, their defenses a little bit more effective in preventing different types of cybersecurity threats from materializing. Over time, it can become more cost effective for the SMB to invest in a zero trust architecture. I think that goes back to the strategy side that Chase was mentioning. Prioritization, which we'll discuss in a few minutes, talking about the 5-step methodology. And then for those SMBs that might be regulated, it can serve as a huge boost into helping them achieve regulatory compliance. But maybe, are there any of these sections that really resonate with either of you?
I mean, I'm 100% about resilience. Death, taxes, and cybersecurity, right? You're going to die, you're going to get taxed, and you're going to get hacked eventually. So being able to deal with that and realize that it's not a zero-sum game. Like, you can get hit and survive and keep going and be able to react and respond and stay in business and not go under. That's where it's all at for me. I would also say that statistically speaking, the studies show a clear cost benefit for folks when they engage in strategy that aligns with dealing with the reality of the problem. So if the question people ask is, will we be able to, stand up when things go wrong, and can we reduce cost with a correct cybersecurity strategic approach? This is where it's at. And then the last thing, just before I quit rambling and let Andrea chime in here, is prioritization. Greg Toohill talks about this all the time, but this is a really great thing, is just, if everything is a priority, nothing is. And that's really not where you want to be. There is a contest of contested space in this era. You're going to have to deal with that. So being able to know and understand where you focus resources, that leads to cost effectiveness, which also ultimately can help on the resiliency side.
I love that. It's almost hard to follow up that answer. For me, I'm going to take it from a slightly different approach. Obviously, resilience is kind of the key reason why I think zero trust is a fantastic strategy for folks to adopt and really help align security back with the business. For me, I see it always as a way to take a step back. I feel like for the last 20 plus years, we threw products at problems and everything was very ad hoc or reactive. Hey, there's this new threat. Now we got to put something to kind of to block that flood. And now we're at the point where it's like, look, we've got so much noise, but at the same time, we've got loss of visibility in some areas. We've changed our architecture so much that these tools are now, bottlenecking or doing unnatural things with the traffic flows. This gives us an opportunity to step back and say, look, let's see how the business has changed. Let's see how we've changed from an architecture perspective and from a prioritization of our assets. And now we can come back in and say, okay, here's what I actually need to do to solve these problems. And it allows us to get rid of a lot of that technical debt and a lot of that process debt that we've kind of built up for so long. And so that's why I'm excited about it, is because not only do we get better security and better visibility and more proactive responses, but it also gives us a chance to kind of clean those inefficient processes that are no longer serving the business or security anymore.
Yeah, that's a great point. For me, I guess one that jumps out at me is really the cost effective nature. I currently work for a small enterprise, but in my past, I have supported SMBs, worked for an SMB for a number of years, and I'll share in my experience, really the budget aspect of investing in technology and cybersecurity was really the big constraint that I dealt with. I could train myself and learn as much about cybersecurity as I wanted to, but getting the organizational buy-in to really spend what it takes to achieve a high degree of cyber resilience is not always free. I mean, there are some ways, some approaches, but I do think that adopting a zero trust methodology can help offset a lot of those costs, especially if we change our mindset into how we're thinking about securing the environment through zero trust. I think it really helps us to be more cost effective in what we're asking our organizations to invest in. So another area that we really expand on in the book is to talk about some strategic approaches to how do you get started with zero trust, and what are some strategic approaches, where to begin. And I think we all agreed, all the authors and the contributors to the document agree that, the most fundamental feedback that we can share with SMBs is to start small. I think one of the statements that I've heard said many times is, start where you're at and use what you have. And so I'm a firm believer in that. And Chase, I don't want to put you on the spot again, but one point that you made in some interactions we had was to start small and be iterative with your approach. And I wanted to ask, would you mind just to maybe share your thoughts around that strategy?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny when you talk to organizations that get into this because they try and approach it like an enterprise when they don't set their businesses up that way. They don't operate that way. But for some reason, cyber, I got to do it like the enterprises do. So what do you do for regular SMBs? You find what works, you leverage it, you iterate, you change, you adapt, you grow, you take those one-hit wonders and turn them into multiple at-bats and those things. This is the same stuff. I actually have a slide that I use when I work with organizations that takes the Lockheed Martin kill chain, which seems to be kind of like a crazy, weird thing for people to understand. And I flip it and put it into the sales process that small businesses use. And all of a sudden, oh, like that makes perfect sense because it's what you're doing. It's the same thing. It just is applied to a different problem space. So I think really it's worth it for organizations to understand technology in this space now is good. It is iterative and you can leverage it to get incrementally better. You're never going to wake up tomorrow, especially having built your enterprise or your business, your networks, your infrastructure, or whatever for the last X number of years. There's no easy button. You're going to have to claw and scratch your way at this just like you did to grow your business. But at the end of it, there is a rainbow at the end of that tunnel. So start working your way to get there. It's a very real process, but it is a process that there is true benefit from.
Yeah, thank you. And I think I mean you make some great points. Another thought as you were talking, another thought that I had around where we were, where our mindset was when we were putting this document together, was to really think about that strategic element of how we approach zero trust for an SMB, and how that can maybe look and feel a little bit differently than an enterprise. And so Andrea, I don't want to maybe lob this question to you, but through your work supporting both SMBs and enterprises, how is it different, framing up, I guess, a strategic approach around zero trust for an SMB compared to an enterprise? Like, where do you focus there, or how does it look and feel different, I guess, is a better way to phrase it.
Yeah, it definitely does look and feel different. One of the reasons I love working with the SMBs is because often the organizations are flatter and less siloed. And when you're thinking about zero trust, because it goes so wide, it goes to the business, it goes to your infrastructure teams, your asset teams, your data teams, and the enterprise space, there's a lot more stakeholders you have to align. And there's a lot more specific use cases in the enterprise where, certain teams might be using specific workflows or processes or technologies that make it a lot harder to say, okay, well, we can reduce overlap here while maintaining those processes because it's a lot harder for them to kind of move things around. With the SMBs, it's the architecture. How are you connecting to things? What's most important to the organization? Are you using IoT in your environment? Are you in the manufacturing space? So you can get a really good idea of where the assets are. And then it makes it a lot easier to get those people involved because often there's maybe one person who's running all of IT. Maybe they have a security person, maybe they don't. So it's a way I like it because I got to come in and kind of help that person out and make them kind of look like that champion within their organization who's helping to make all these positive changes. So it just goes a lot faster and definitely a lot less stressful.
Yeah. That's those are great points. You bring up another thought, which we address in our document, was to discuss organizational change management to a degree, right? And it's establishing allies within the business to get them to invest in. And I think the strategic approach and the approach that we take as technologists to kind of sell that business story, and how we address organizational change management through that really helps us to either be successful or maybe, not as successful as we'd like to be. So great points there. As we further on, one of the areas that we firmly believe, and I think Chase really hit the nail on the head, but one of the areas that we spend a good deal of time trying to evangelize in the document is to talk about some different ways that third-party vendors, managed services providers, and managed security services providers can be leveraged. But we do think that there are some ways, some approaches, some strategies that SMBs can take to make those interactions and engagements more effective. Specifically if the third party is going to be hired to help an SMB build a zero trust program within their organization, it probably helps to have an MSSP or an MSP with zero trust experience. Also, some other points that we made in the document are providing some guidance on how to conduct the due diligence process for the managed services provider, right? What are some key traits or sets of experience to look for? How might you measure that to ensure that it's going to be effective for your organization and your needs? And so I wanted to throw this out to both of you. Are there some other approaches or maybe, pieces of guidance that you might give to an SMB on how to choose or select the right external service provider?
Yeah, one thing that I'm very excited about working with SoftChoice is implementation services. So when you think about the different pillars of zero trust, if there's technology to be to be embedded, for example, I'm thinking like identity is a big one, or even data prepping for AI. Those are tricky skills. And when you think about like just the market, identity folks tend to often go towards the enterprise space. And so because it's so nuanced and because you want to make sure that your policies are set up to do the right controls, and to again embed zero trust type of methodology and dynamic policies, reaching out to partners who have got expertise in those areas can actually really help the SMBs, because now I don't have to be an expert in identity or data. I can go to somebody who's done this a million times and is going to take some of that workload off of me. And honestly, it's gonna be a lot less stressful knowing that this person knows how to do this properly. So my foundations are hopefully going to be great going in.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of everything Andrea says. And then the other point that I would make too is if you're talking with someone that says that they can help you with your ZT journey and they're unwilling to do some sort of red team op, then they're probably not going to be the person or group for you. Because if your goal in this space is to survive when the adversaries come at you, you'd better learn what it looks like on the far end of a fist fight. Don't be I like to call them cyber black belts, the folks that got their black belt in the dojo but never got in a street fight. Don't be one of those folks. Go off and get somebody that knows how to run a red team op, not a pen test, a red team, and then let that be your guiding sort of statement of where you are and where you can plan to go from there. Because otherwise, you're just guessing. You're trying to build, your zero trust approach around, well, I think we're really weak in this area. You try it and let it run its course, and then use that as your plan and strategy to go forward. And if you talk to a MSP or MSSP and they, don't do red teams or can't engage in a red team, either find a red team or find a different MSP or MSSP.
That's a great bit of feedback. So let me ask a follow-up question. Do you recommend that an SMB wait until maybe a specific zero trust use case is delivered before they conduct a red team, or do you think that that's something that happens sort of often as their zero trust program is sort of in a state of evolution?
In today's world, I would say waiting is against my advice. Get going on something now. Figure out a red team op just to currently the way you are. Have them red team your people, do phishing exercises, those types of things. But waiting is not where you want to be. The adversaries are not waiting.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. Great feedback. The other point, I guess, to make around engaging service providers is at some level, we also have to address the risk that service providers can present for our organization. If we look at several notable breaches that have happened throughout the last few years have happened at the result of integrating some sort of vendor or giving them some sort of access. And so I just wanted to maybe throw out to the group any thoughts on, how zero trust approaches can help even in those particular cases. In one hand, we're telling a SMB to engage a service provider, but also I think that there's probably some benefits that zero trust can create from a resilience perspective against other types of third-party vendors.
I think from a resiliency perspective, when you look at the supply chain, there's a lot of focus on it right now. Like being a Canadian, can't speak too much to the U.S. government, but at the same time, I've seen a lot of guidance come around. Like we have to look at the supply chain. We have to understand the risk that the supply chain itself brings, be it the vendors, as you mentioned, be it service providers, MSSPs. So having that built into, again, your risk appetite that you're talking to the board about, be it built into your security strategy, zero trust gives you another layer. So when you think about if a process fails and because someone's coming in maliciously, so say an MSSP is compromised and they're coming in to your infrastructure. Zero trust, again, is going to look at that traffic and it's going to make a judgment call. Well, they're trying to do something different than the normal process, or they're trying to open files or copy data. Those are the types of controls that zero trust is putting in to say, hey, this looks different than normal. I'm going to flag this. I'm going to put in a dynamic policy that says I'm going to isolate this for now, or I'm going to watch what it does. But those are the beautiful things about zero trust, is it does help us manage a bit of that supply chain risk. Is it, perfect? Not necessarily, because again, there's so much onus still on the supply chain to make sure that they're implementing, for example, zero trust or these higher security standards. But it does give you a bit of that risk trade-off where at least you've got something in place to hopefully detect that this stuff is going on.
Yeah. Yeah, when I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking it kind of addresses one is the prioritization of risk, right? If the risk of a third party breach occurring is a priority for an SMB, then certainly something they should invest in, but also understanding the level of maturity that they want to kind of grow a particular control. Also, as part of the conversation as it relates to zero trust and how it can provide value against supply chain attacks. So as we continue down, as the document starts to take a different I guess a turn around actually implementing zero trust architecture, we talk about using the 5-step zero trust methodology. And this really focuses on addressing your DAS, or data application assets and services. And so as we look at the different steps, the first step really is inventory and assessing your assets, or formally we call that defining your protect surface. And so I wanted to throw this out to the group. As an SMB initially gets started with taking that initial inventory, is there maybe one piece of advice or guidance that you would tell them, maybe avoiding a particular landmine or avoiding a problem that could grow and scope later and make that achieving step one a lot harder?
So for me, I think what is interesting here is if you go back to John's original model, the Kindervag model around ZT, we talked about data, and really factoring in on that, whereas now it's evolved towards more of this protect surface side of things and being able to put it. The reason that was done is because data as it stands currently is a very difficult thing to even define. If you think about your organization, your business, in a given day, you generate a lot of hopefully potentially valuable intellectual property in a lot of different ways. So if you fall back on that old sort of original model of data is where things are and where you focus, and then you begin to work your way forward from that, you almost can never chase that down. It's like trying to look at a black hole and figure out where the edge is. Whereas if you're looking at it from this perspective of inventory and assess assets, assets are more static. Assets include things that are going to be more definable. So then you work your way through the methodology. I think one thing for SMBs to get, to be aware of is make sure that you're working through the current iterations of the ZT strategic approach, because this has evolved over time, which is what good strategies are supposed to do. And this is where you begin to gain ground. So just be cautious of where your references are and where you begin to plot, plan, and scheme. There's things that you can and cannot do, and being able to define where you're going to apply protection is very, very critical.
Yeah, that's a great point. The other thought that I had around this inventory and basically the asset inventory is we talk in the document a lot about learning what drives the business and really driving this point home. So from my perspective, I think we talk a lot about business alignment, right? Cybersecurity teams or IT teams, for that matter, or representatives in an SMB organization who are responsible for IT, need to kind of understand both sides of that coin, understand the technology and the risk and cybersecurity side, while also understanding its impact on the business or the organization. And one thing that jumped out to me as we were working on this document, we really tried to drive home, is the fact that by going through step one and doing this asset inventory, the SMB really gets to understand what drives the business at a very granular level. Chase, you talked a lot about the assets, right? And this can kind of be ambiguous to represent a number of different things within an organization that drives it. But I think understanding an SMB's dependency on different resources really becomes insightful, not only obviously for building a zero trust program or architecture, but also just as you understand different risks to the SMB organization. So I don't think that point can really be underscored enough. As we step down the 5-step methodology, step 2, really, we dig into mapping transaction flows. And in this step, we start talking about how resources kind of are interconnected to one another, and understanding how data traverses different systems within your organization. And by doing this, we understand an organization's dependency on different technology platforms. We understand the processes in detail that maybe one particular SMB use case follows in order to be achieved. And in doing that, we get some visibility into, maybe from a zero trust perspective, where we can implement different types of controls or validations. And so I wanted to once again throw out to the group, what are some other benefits that we get when we start picking apart transaction flows to understand these dependencies?
Yeah, I love this specific area of the zero trust model, because when you think about architecture, you've got business architecture, enterprise architecture, you've got security architecture, and a lot of times I feel like they were competing against each other. It was, this is how the business operates. This is how we're going to, connect either users to systems, be it machine to machine identities, those types of things. And for the longest time, it was kind of like, well, this is how security has to operate, because we have to maintain these types of architectures. And I think zero trust allows us to look at the advancements in how we're, connecting users to assets, like especially the cloud and remote work that kind of happened over the last 5 years. It changed a lot of our architectures. So now we've got these new transaction paths where I'm coming in, for example, to access business applications, but now I'm coming in through a Microsoft, or I'm coming in through some other type of cloud provider to get to those business applications, which used to live on premise. So now that gives me an opportunity to say, okay, well, if my risk is on my network and it's these data stores or it's where this data is being contained, now I have an opportunity to look at how that architecture is kind of forming through those transaction flows. And I know now where I need to put those controls. If I need to restrict users coming in to this sensitive part on my network, great. Let's ensure that they're only coming in specifically to that network segment if they need access to that versus, well, now you're on my network and you can kind of go wherever you want. So it starts to really help you figure out what are my crown jewels? Where are they protected? How do people access them? So you can redefine what control do I need? And now you know where to put it. So you get that visibility and control in the right spot versus either changing how people connect in order to hit that control or and hindering the business either through delay, latency, or just awkward architecture that causes a lot of breakpoints. But it's to me that's most one of the most encouraging parts of this is now we're actually looking for more efficient ways to do security that's not going to hinder the users.
Yeah, thank you for that. So the other point of mapping transaction flows is really it starts to help kind of paint the picture and provide that business context around, you know, what matters, how does a business accomplish its missions and goals, right? And that kind of steps 1 and 2 kind of move us into step 3, which is where we actually start to build our zero trust architecture. And so I think the key point that we really try to drive home is you know, creating these technology environments around securing the DAS or data assets, applications, and services with business context. And by doing that, it really helps us to prioritize and help the SMB prioritize what's important to them, right? We've talked a lot about the constraints that SMBs face, don't have enough time, don't have enough money, don't have enough people. And so there's a finite amount of those resources. And so, you know, determining where they spend their time and how they prioritize protecting these different elements is extremely critical. And so steps 1 and 2 kind of provide that visibility as inputs into step 3. And that's where we actually start, you know, building something tangible that can protect their prioritized, you know, kind of list of use cases or resources or assets. So I just wanted to once again maybe throw it out to either of you if you have any other thoughts around some really key elements not to miss when we think about how an SMB should go down the path of designing their zero trust architecture.
I mean, that point that we wrote in here about designing a tailored zero trust architecture, when you go to a tailor, the tailor doesn't say, here's your suit and you turn around and leave, or if they, you know, whatever you're going to wear, your hat or whatever. It's made for you. And it's usually something where they have to do some refinement and move things and do some pinning and then resewing and whatever. That's where you're trying to get to with your ZT architecture. Cloud, all these services now make it where you can do that. There's not going to be a one and done sort of rinse and repeat type of thing that you're going to find for your organization. So understand that. And if you do this correctly, and I've done this with a lot of organizations, you should see a reduction in cost. You should see a reduction in expenses. You should see an optimization of bandwidth because you're going to get rid of crap that you didn't need that wasn't really doing anything. So just understand that the tailored part of this is exceptionally critical. But tailoring means that you're freeing up resources, and that's where you're going to go. It's expensive to get a tailored suit, but man, you look a lot better than something you buy off the rack at Walmart.
Yeah, that's a great point. And if you buy one tailored suit, I would say is more cost effective than, you know, buying 5 shirts and pants off the rack at Kohl's. So great point. All right. Well, once we've designed our zero trust architecture, then we start talking about implementing policies to enforce that granular access control that we've been discussing, right? So step 4 in our document, we really start to uncover an approach or suggested guidance around, you know, looking at the protect surface and prioritizing the protect surfaces that are controls are implemented against based on the architecture that you've defined in step 3. And then you start implementing policies to enforce different types of controls like, multi-factor authentication or re-authentication, granular access control, these types of, measures that a zero trust architecture would incorporate, and the policies that define when these things happen. So once again, want to throw out to the group, in addition to, looking at the different controls that we would enforce, regular MFA, and different policies that we would implement within our architectures. Are there any recommendations that you all would give to an SMB to, implement their designs in a more, I guess, maybe strategic but effective way, and avoiding some landmines that they might otherwise step on?
I mean, look at the reports that are out there that are kind of seminal and biblical references. If you ask me, the Mandiant MTrends report, the Verizon DBIR, go back and look at 5-7 years worth of data that tells you where compromise is likely to occur, and begin to apply controls around those areas. The most popular passwords in 2024 were password and password 123. I hate to break it to you. So go fix your password policy management stuff, get around that. People still click phishing links. Like, don't waste your time trying to solve problems that aren't solvable. This is the only space in all of warfare where the bad guys literally tell us what they're going to do and what works, and we sit around wondering how to stop them. So apply your controls based on the past 5, 7, 10 years worth of data, and you're applying strategic controls that will actually provide benefit and value. This shouldn't be a, Kentucky windage problem where you lick your finger and stick it in the air and hope you get the wind right. It's pretty clear where things go wrong and which things you should begin to focus on first.
A great point. All right, so I think we've talked about that. So I guess the key takeaways for step 4 is don't focus on what our past indicators have pointed us to, and then also look internally to prioritize based on those protect surfaces that you've identified in previous steps. And that brings us to step 5, which is really monitor and maintain the zero trust environment. And so once again, I think we kind of point to a key recommendation that Chase has made and talked to, but iterative improvement. And so I don't think we can underscore the importance of that enough. But with respect to monitor and maintenance, or that continuous improvement process, in any other guidance or feedback that you would suggest to SMBs to make sure that they're not short-sighted with step 5 in this methodology?
I mean, it's going to continue to go on for a while. I actually think this is where you see the real value in working with an MSP or MSSP partner, because your SLAs should be able to guarantee that they're watching what's going on there. They should be able to pay attention to this 24/7, or follow the sun, or however that's put together. So monitoring and maintaining is not going to be a snapshot in time. This is 24/7, 365. I think this is where you can, really line up on the value that you're going to get from working with an outside party is going to be very, very clear. You can do it for 8 hours a day, maybe, but you're going to need to do this 24 hours a day. If you're monitoring and maintaining, you're going to need help, and that's where MSPs, MSSPs can help with this. And step 5 is a very, very critical step.
That's a great point. And in our document, we do throw out several questions to consider. And I think, you kind of hit the nail on the head perfectly. How will performance of the zero trust environment be measured? And I think if we're engaging third parties, that's a perfect example of something not to lose sight of. How will data be collected? How will gaps and weaknesses of our architectures be continuously improved and addressed over time? And I think all of this will eventually help the SMB look at their zero trust implementation as a continuous improvement initiative, more of a program, rather than something that's just set it and forget it, which if that's the case, if that's the approach they take, then they'll never fully realize the benefits of zero trust. So so great points there. So with respect to the document, we talk a lot about how SMB should get started. We really try to do a good job of framing well, let me pause here. Eric, you said we could stop and start, right? You can edit this out. I'm assuming so. So I guess the question to you all, do we want to include a conclusion in this? Because I see we've got a few more minutes. Do we want to go into any other questions? What are your thoughts?
I'm good with
Maybe
either. It's
Yeah.
going to come down to, are there any specific questions I don't think we covered?
I don't know how, fixated we are on meeting an hour of material. Or Eric, are you there?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. You guys have any sort of closing thoughts? To go
So,
around.
so I guess the question was, I think we're about like 44 minutes in
Mhm.
recording time. Do we, is there, I mean, do we just want to do closing thoughts now, or is that the thought?
Yeah, that's fine. If you've sort of exhausted the slides and the
Well,
topic.
we're at the conclusion slide. I didn't know, I mean, are we gonna, maybe we can, as the conclusion slide, we can just go around the room with closing thoughts and then
Mhm.
that'd be it. Is that
That works.
okay? All right. Okay. So in conclusion, we've talked a lot about how this SMB document was formulated. We shared the context around our thought process of what constitutes an SMB. We shared the five-step implementation methodology and shared a lot of insights into different approaches that SMBs can take to understand their environment, collect information to adequately build a zero trust architecture, and better protect and make the business case for better protecting their organization through zero trust. So as we wind down and close, I wanted to ask for any closing thoughts that you might have. Andrea, maybe we'll start with you.
sure. Again, I'm a huge fan of zero trust because regardless of organization size, you can absolutely implement this type of strategy. I've had the pleasure of working with a lot of different organizations who are not in the enterprise space, and I've seen some great movement towards adopting a full zero trust maturity. First things I'd say is think about your architecture. Architecture and mapping those transaction flows are going to be the key to knowing what kind of controls you need and where to place them. Look at the technology you already have. Often you may have something in your organization in use that will help you achieve some of these controls. So don't think you have to go out and purchase new technology. There's a good chance if you're using some like larger security platforms or productivity platforms, maybe some of those controls already exist. And thirdly, if you need help, feel free to reach out to your MSPs, to your service partners. They're going through a lot of this with other organizations similar to yours, so they can help you with achieving any of these different areas of zero trust, be it data, be it identity. Don't feel you have to go it alone. There's so many great resources out there to help you achieve this.
Thank you, Andrea. Chase?
Yeah, and for me, I mean, I just, you're in a space where you're a viable target, like we said, because you exist. You have connections to other networks, like you are a gazelle on the Serengeti, just like everybody else, and there's lions in the grass. So start realizing that you're at risk, and begin plotting how you're going to do better than the next organization down the street. Don't approach this like an enterprise. You haven't done that with your business. Approach it like a small business and figure out what you can do and where you can, and things that you can't. bring on a partner that can help you achieve those goals and those objectives, just like you do for taxes and bookkeeping and all those other services that you work with as well. And then the only other thing I would say is that the time to wait has passed. Begin moving somehow, some way, if it's research, if it's plotting, planning, scheming, board meetings, working with someone that can help you advise, like whatever it is, start moving. The tide is not in your favor, and the longer you wait, the more risk that you take on.
Thank you. All great points. Yeah, the only thing I guess I would add is, the man, sorry, I was trying to pull something from my brain and drew a blank there. No, great points. And I guess the only other thing that I would add is CSA is a resource to you. We're an organization of cybersecurity experts that have done quite a bit across the industry, from serving small to medium-sized businesses to supporting small to medium-sized businesses to implementing different types of maybe what might seem difficult, like implementing zero trust architectures, and we can be a resource to you. So if there's any interest in learning more about how you might benefit further from Cloud Security Alliance, or getting involved in some of our research or working groups, please visit our website, and there's lots of resources there to point you in the right direction. So with that said, Andrea, Chase, I want to thank you for your time this afternoon. Thank you for sharing all your valuable insights, and hope you all have a good rest of your day.